Welcome to the Wellness Law Podcast, where wellness and the law meet for contemplation and collaboration. This podcast is brought to you by the Center for Health and Wellness Law. I am your host, Barbara Zabawa. Welcome to the Wellness Law Podcast. I'm Barbara Zabawa, and with me today, I'm so thrilled, are Rachel Pagenin and Dr. Rich Joseph, who I was able to connect with because I read a fantastic article that they co-wrote called How to Separate Sound Wellness Solutions from Seductive Snake Oil. And I'll make sure I put a link to that in the description. But I read that article. It was very relevant to an article that I am writing on wellness and the First Amendment. And so I reached out and they were so gracious in agreeing to talk with me. And now I have them on the Wellness Law Podcast. So welcome, Rachel and Rich. Thanks so much for having us here. So why don't you both introduce yourselves a little bit more, because I know I didn't do it justice, and then we can dive into some of the pressing questions I have for you.
Awesome. So thanks so much for having us, Barbara. We're thrilled to be here. Rich and I are long friends from way back in our Boston years. I'm now in California. I am the director of scientific research and education at a wellness company called Restore Hyper Wellness. And I'm also a faculty member in the program of human biology at Stanford University. And my work really looks at how to create and glean information about a lot of these wellness therapies that we know suffer from an absence of evidence, particularly in the human longevity, healthy aging, and muscle lenses. So lots of fun stuff to talk about here on the podcast today.
Thanks. Rich, how about you?
Yeah, Rach, as Rach said, we've been longtime collaborators for a long time. And I was previously the chief medical officer at Restore, where Rach is now, but I currently run my own private medical practice. Really focuses on proactive health, bringing solutions from the health and fitness, health and wellness world into a more clinical approach for people, sort of putting all the pieces together for folks who, some people need to access the traditional delivery system and other people need to spend more time outside of it. All of us have things to work on with our health. So figuring out what works best for different people. And I'm still on faculty at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Med School here in Boston in a research capacity as well. So I think, Rachel and I probably bring a lot of different lenses to the conversation. So there's like researchers, practitioners, hobbyists, and enthusiasts on our own, right? And so, glad to be here.
Oh, yes. So we have some esteemed scholars on the podcast today, and I'm really, really excited about that and honored. You guys hail from very reputable institutions, and I really, really admire the fact that you are looking at the wellness industry because, frankly, I don't think enough research and attention is paid to the wellness industry, which is partly why I'm having the podcast, why I'm doing the symposium later this year, and I write about it. So again, what attracted me to you, how I found you was through that article on snake oil. And I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about what prompted you to write that article. So I don't know who wants to take that question.
I'll start and Rach can follow. I think so. Well, both of us have, come back again from sort of like the health and wellness industry. Actually, I think originally, right? Rach, like you've been, you can share what you do, but I was a strength and conditioning coach for a long time in the fitness world. And before I became a doctor, and Rach, you can share your background there too.
Yeah, same. I started out way back in the day. If you're in Boston, you'll remember this, is that over in Porter Square, there used to be a Bally's Total Fitness, like way down in the basement. As an 18-year-old, I started as a personal trainer and then also became a strength and conditioning coach and really have had one foot in the world of wellness and fitness, as well as one foot in the world of academia, and as Rich has in sort of clinical medicine.
Yeah, and I think that is sort of the various perspectives, and I think Rach and I connect because we have been straddling these worlds for a long time, right? And sort of thinking about the intersection, how to bring them together in thoughtful ways. And I think have both sort of things we love about both worlds and critiques of both worlds as well. And so I think when we started working together in the context of Restore, which was, a lot of what they do is called like interventional wellness, right? So things that aren't clinical medicine and don't require a ton of physician oversight or that, but they're interventional in the sense that they're causing changes to people's physiology, right? And that's for healing purposes or for sort of more optimization purposes or similar, there's an impact physiologically. And so I sort of like, I forget who, we were just sort of batting around this, like, I think we've always just felt this tension sort of wherever we are. And we were like, we should bring some voice to this in a thoughtful way, right? Of, both, figuring out how do these worlds work together more thoughtfully and sort of bringing their assets together in a way that would just sort of advance both thoughtful way, especially in an age of sort of healthcare consumerism where a lot of people are out there trying, experimenting, doing these things for themselves without much guidance. And understandably can't access a lot of or won't access a lot of this stuff through sort of traditional healthcare, but also there's a lot of consumerism in sort of the commercial world and some of this stuff. So there's sort of pros and cons and dangers in both sides. Right. So I don't know if you'd add anything to that. That's
Yeah, definitely. So, as a more sort of like classically trained scientist and Rich as more a classically trained clinician, we were really seeing this tension between these worlds in the sense that people are accessing these therapies. And if we think about Restore, it's complementary kind of therapies like red light, cryotherapy, but also more, and I like this term, I wrote it down, Rich, interventional wellness, things like IV micronutrients, right? And in my life before I became the restore scientist, I was looking at oral supplementation, right? And so that's one of the reasons why Rich called me and he was like, "Hey, we're trying to put some science behind a lot of our therapies here at Restore. Would you come and do some research here? Because people are seeking it out. And as you've seen, Barbara, there are claims that are being made. There's a real gap in the literature around many of these therapies. And I like to think about it as, there's an absence of evidence for a lot of these therapies, not in the sense that we don't anecdotally see positive things. We know that they're safe, but it's not written in the literature. And this comes to this tension between these two worlds because getting funding for these kinds of interventions, people kind of see it as frivolous. Like, why would we study cryotherapy? Why would we study red light? When, as Rich mentioned just a moment ago, we actually do know that there's some pretty significant physiologic changes that are happening. And at the same time, you've got the wellness industry making these claims about these interventions and these therapies that are just on the border of whether or not that evidence exists. And so it was really great, and this is one of the things that I really appreciated about Rich's leadership at Restore, and then the rest of the C-suite when I came on, is I said to them very specifically, "I am not coming in to rubber stamp your therapies," right? Like, we're gonna investigate these therapies. I am going to do some good, high quality science, and you need to be ready and prepared to take the data as it comes out. And so this was sort of the revolutionary idea, if you will, that Rich and I had behind this article where we were saying these two worlds can coexist and they should, because in traditional academia, they're not studying these things. And yet at the same time, real humans, consumers, patients are
Right.
seeking them out. And we need to understand exactly what they're doing.
So just for clarification, you guys have been talking about two worlds, and I just want to make sure that everyone understands the two worlds that you're talking about are the academic world and the wellness world. Just want to make sure that
right.
that
Less academic. I would say call evidence-based medicine would be one
But
way. Yeah.
okay.
Which is at a high bar and a really strict standard and really only works for, pharmaceuticals. I mean, really. And so there's just like a lot of things you're not going to be able to study with, double-blinded RCTs essentially. And so, but I don't think that that means we shouldn't study the other things that are people are there and obviously making sure that they're safe and then seeing do they have any, clinical efficacy to them.
So you both have positions or appointments at very esteemed academic institutions, Harvard for Rich, Stanford for Rachel. Do you find that your institutions are supportive of the work that you're doing in this space, or do you have some colleagues, kind of roll their eyes and frown on the fact that you're spending some time in this wellness world?
It's a good question. I wouldn't say that like I spend too much time that's just sort of like in the institution. I'll say that that said, I haven't like there's been no sort of backlash to it. It's only been sort of welcomed pretty enthusiastically. And I think also, you know, a lot of tools that are used out there now in sort of the world of wellness, a lot of them have their original use case in sort of traditional medicine. Like if you think about hyperbaric therapy, or even like, I mean, we have like a great psychiatrist here at MGH who's using infrared PBM photobiomodulation for mental health disorders and transcranial stimulation and things like that that are then sort of taken down a notch or sort of like protocols are changed for them their application more in the world of wellness, right? For people who want to either optimize, right, and sort of thinking about using them in that use case, right? So it's like I do think there's like a lot actually between the two worlds. It sort of depends on the use case, the dosage, etc. But you see some of the same modalities being used. Rachel,
Interesting.
yeah,
I'm laughing a little bit over here because I'm what you would call a pathological optimist, right? Like I actually really do see the glass as half full all the time. But in this case, I'm like, I see tension all over the place, including people that said to me when I was sort of leaving my 10-year job and coming into the industry side, like, don't do it. Like you're gonna blow up your career. You are, going to the dark side. And you see, right now, I feel like in the world that we live in as well, there is just sort of like a more even political and policy oriented tension here, right? Where it's, you know, looking at what is evidence-based medicine? How do we quantify that? What are the randomized control trials that show whether or not these, interventions, whether it's something like red light or hyperbaric or something more traditional like, the conversation around the utilization of GLP-1s, whether it's from a compounding pharmacy or and you get this tension of people being like, it's either one thing or the other. It's either researched and there's good hard data or there isn't. And where I see people kind of coming apart is if there's no data, the absence of evidence consideration, they will sometimes defer to if there's no data, then it doesn't work. And I think
Right.
that's where the tension really starts to come on board is you get, these wellness companies that are saying, wait a minute, we've got, either anecdotal data from our clients, or in some cases, there's a lot of good companies using their big data sets. And we wrote about this in that STAT article to really investigate and understand what are the associations here between the utilization of these therapies and health outcomes. A lot of wearables companies are doing this right now. And so I just think we're seeing this transition of what do we accept as the evidence? How do we move forward knowing that these two worlds are in tension with each other, but really do need to be collaborating. And I think that's the bridge that Rich and I are both starting to try and figure out how to navigate is we are all moving in the same direction. And by fighting with each other over who's right and who's wrong, we are not helping our clients, the consumers, our patients.
Sure.
And so we actually do need to be collaborating a lot more rather than nitpicking over, did this study constitute evidence, an evidence base? Was it strong enough? Was it in the right population? And say, can we work together? And Rich mentioned a couple of really good labs that are working often in the integrative space. MGH has a really great integrative institute. Not poo poo on that because people are seeking this out and
Yeah.
it makes them very confused too if the experts are fighting at the top.
Yeah. And that's a great point that you both are driving home. And I just want to reiterate. I mean, the consumers, we can't ignore the fact that the wellness industry is growing and that consumers are seeking these kinds of services out. And, if the medical industry doesn't like that, that's that's too bad because it's the train's already left the station, in my opinion. And so how are you going to respond? Are you going to continue to, as you say, Rachel, poo-poo it, or are you going to try to acknowledge that this is the reality? And there's many, many factors that are feeding into this reality, you know, part of which is the failure of the medical care system and not meeting the needs that consumers want. So they're looking to another industry to fulfill those needs. And so, yeah, I mean, so with that in mind, do you guys feel like there is a growing community of experts like yourselves that are trying to bridge that gap, or do you still feel like you are kind of the pioneers here and there's still a little bit of resistance that you're having to face alone?
I guess I'll speak for me. I think a lot of it is just like for us is like the product of our journeys to date, right? Like we spent time in both of these worlds, right? I think it requires a level of like humility and intellectual curiosity to sort of just want to keep learning and, you know, dismiss anything, right? And I think both of us agree that like so much of health is like for each individual is like N of one experimentation for people to figure out what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And who knows why certain things work and they don't work for other people. And so I think I can understand why people have gone through the medical training that I've gone through would be sort of distrustful of or not knowing. Because again, if you don't know or if you're not exposed to something, I think the tendency is to be distrustful of or sort of say no, it doesn't work, right? And like I think physicians feel a lot of pressure to sort of be all knowing and sort of be able to guide people in the right way. And like that's an impossible ask now. Like there's too much knowledge out there, right? And so how do you transition from being sort of expert to like partner and guide? And I think that takes a lot of like humility for a practitioner to do that and willingness to sort of let's try, let's see what happens. As long as something's safe for you, let's try, let's see what works, let's see what doesn't work, right? And can I in my practice, like I do everything myself too, right? It's just like it's not like I'm just like doing stuff for my clients. It's like this is a personal journey too. So I think it requires a level of sort of personal investment to sort of think this way. Rach, I don't know if you'd add to that.
Yeah. I'll add on to that too, as I think there are a growing number of people that are starting to bridge this gap. I do think that Rich and I are sort of uniquely positioned in the sense that we have a foot in both worlds. I find that a lot of people that are in the academic space that are dabbling in some of these therapies, hyperbaric oxygen, red light, they are still sort of like intellectually or clinically curious about it, but they are not necessarily seeing it for the most part in the sort of like commercial industry space and how that can
Mhm.
be utilized in both spaces. And to sort of 2 points to what Rich was saying is I think oftentimes because people don't have this intellectual curiosity, or in some cases, to your point, Barbara, and the point of the podcast is I think there's a lot of legal ramifications of when you can say, yes, I recommend this therapy, or I don't, based upon the evidence there, that what it does is it pushes us into almost turf wars, right? Where it's like, no, this is traditional medicine and I'm only going to do this. Or traditional medicine has failed everybody, so we're only going to work in the wellness space. When again, what Rich and I are seeing is how do we bring these two worlds together so that the evidence starts to become more clear
Yeah.
and we can start to incorporate these therapies in a way that traditionally trained clinicians are comfortable and excited and curious about working with their clients on. And at the same time, the wellness industry or the fitness industry can serve as a support arm to traditional healthcare. So it doesn't become an either or, rather, it becomes a collaboration. And to your point a minute ago, Barbara, that leaves the client, the patient, however you want to, refer to that person in the middle as being able to reach out to both of these spaces without, hiding one from another. I'll give you an example from the supplementation research that I've done. Most patients will not disclose to their practitioners that they are taking supplements because they're afraid that their clinician is going to say, that's dumb. It doesn't work. Why are you doing that? Right. And so what we're trying to do here is demonstrate that these two worlds can and should work together to break down barriers, whether it's legal, whether it's claims that are being made, so that the client feels supported in their wellness journey overall.
Well, isn't hiding supplements that you might be taking from your physician also clinically dangerous? I mean, couldn't it pose some clinical repercussions if, you're prescribed a drug that maybe has an adverse reaction with a supplement that you're taking?
Well, yeah, 100%. Yes. But like, I understand why people do it. And like, I think that like, a lot of medical care has been pretty paternalistic, over the years, and I think there's like still like a really tough power dynamic, right, that needs to shift. And as Rach said, like, people want to find solutions in different places now, and don't want to be judged for, we don't want to feel shame or judgment, and that's like just natural human tendency. And so I get it. Like, why would you want to tell us those things to your practitioner if you thought that they were going to be dismissive or, open minded?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Rich. You both have been making some fantastic comments and points, but I just wanted to highlight that, that tension for the patient, for the consumer, with stepping into the world of healthcare, traditional conventional medicine, the paternalistic nature of it, the history of that is, I think, in direct conflict with the wellness movement, which ideally is meant to help empower people in different ways, in different levels. And the law needs to respond accordingly. And so right now the law treats those two worlds very, very different. Conventional medicine, the law really is more supportive of a paternalistic kind of response to the
Mhm.
patient because of all the protections that the law offers for patients, as opposed to wellness, which isn't really regulated at all. And so almost forces consumers to empower themselves because it's a buyer beware kind of environment. And so when you're straddling both of those worlds, it can get confusing, and the law is not helping. It's not helping in that respect. And so, and that kind of trickles down to the providers and other players in each of those worlds. And so my work is trying to ferret that out, trying to bring some clarity to the people who are in those worlds. And yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy because it takes a bit of a leap intellectually to kind of understand and navigate those two worlds from a legal sense. And yeah, it's been a challenge for me. So I'm grateful for people like you who are, who are researchers, who are academics, who have also experience in these two worlds that you're talking about as personal trainers, and trying to bridge that gap and bring some legitimacy and understanding, because it's not all snake oil. Some of it is, but it's not. And the consumers want it. They in fact argue that they need it because, yeah, they're not getting the attention and the help to optimize their well-being from the healthcare system. I think they would love it that if their primary care doctor would actually spend an hour of time each week to talk with them about how they can change their lifestyle habits and, adopt all these behaviors and change their environment to make their life more purposeful and, and improve their well-being in all those dimensions. There's just no way
Yeah.
they're gonna do that. So until the healthcare system is bends towards that to meet that need, something else will do it, and that's wellness. And so, yeah, in each of our own ways, I see us kind of trying to bridge those two worlds.
100%. I would also just like to say we're kind of throwing a ton of shade here on the healthcare side of this equation. Is one of the things, and this is what that STAT article was really about as well, was this idea of snake oil that you just tapped into, Barbara. And Rich and I both also very strongly believe that the wellness industry side of the equation has a significant responsibility to not mislead clients and not make statements or claims that are outside of either the current literature or demonstrate in some kind of way that their therapies are indeed working. And I think, you can just sort of say in some levels, oh, a person has agency and they can make decisions for themselves. But in many cases, we see, as you just mentioned, Barbara, that these are patients that are frustrated with the care that they are getting, and they're seeking any alternative that they have control over, that they can take action on in their healthcare journey, whether it's something as simple as I just don't feel well, I've got brain fog, all the way up to some really complicated diagnoses that people are just like, I'm desperate right now. And I do believe that that leaves the door open for taking advantage of people
Yeah.
that don't understand the literature. They don't understand that these claims are in mice or cells, or are just kind of using very flowery marketing language as well to start to steer people toward utilization. So I do think it is incumbent upon both of these industries, whether it's traditional evidence-based healthcare or the new emerging wellness industry, which, by the way, is eclipsing healthcare in from a financial perspective. We see that that industry is going to be worth significantly more. I believe the data is by 2030 than traditional healthcare. They're making a lot of money on that side of the equation. We need
Is
to
that
make sure
that's international, Rachel? Is that
it's
global?
US. That was either a Deloitte or a McKinsey report that came out
Okay.
maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty astounding. And then we also see that that trend holds internationally. And so I do think it is incumbent upon both of these industries to make sure that what they are doing is honest, at the same time curious, and making sure that we are supporting these clients in a very safe way so that people can be making decisions, informed decisions to help for the long term.
Yeah. Absolutely. Trust has to be part of both systems. And yeah, that's also a lot of the work that I'm trying to do by helping create standards and some guidance around uh, when you do practice in the wellness space. What are some of the guideposts that you should be adopting? Because yeah, there is danger, not just from a legal sense, but from a, from a ha- physical harm, mental harm sense as well.
Yeah, as you can probably tell by talking to us, like we're always going to pull back towards the center a little bit, and I think that like are comfortable. The truth often lies probably in the middle somewhere, right? And that's uncomfortable for a lot of folks. Like black and white's a bit easier most of the time for our brains, and I think Rich and I appreciate the nuance and sort of want to live there and help pull people there because that's usually where the truth is. But it's hard to put all the incentives in the right place to get there.
Yes, and that's a good reminder for everyone is that there aren't any black and whites. Rarely, I have to remind my law students of that all the time.
Yep.
But yeah, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we have to, on both sides, be open to looking at the potential benefits and risks on each. So with that, we could talk all day. I know we could, but we're gonna wrap it up, and I just want to ask either both of you to share if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, where could they do that?
Rich, you go since you have more of a presence than I do.
Rich Rich enters the social media sphere kicking and screaming. You can find me you can find me at Rachel Pajednik, so my first and last name. I'm mostly active on social media on Instagram and Threads. You can also find me on my website, rachelpajednik.com. Or if you want to check out the stuff that we're doing at Restore to try and bridge this gap, you can go to restore.com/restore labs.
Great.
You can
And
find
I'll
me by finding Rachel Pajetnik. No, I was joking. Rach could connect us. No, I struggle with social media for many reasons, but I'm on LinkedIn again. Restarted my profile, so I can engage there, and then I run my own private practice. It's called Vim Medicine, VIM medicine.com, and welcome people to reach out that way. It's a very local practice right now, but hoping to expand it over time. And Yeah, that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Great. And VIM is VIM as in Mary or N as in
The I
Nancy?
am is in medicine. Yes, answer
Oh,
vitality and
okay.
motion.
Oh, okay, great. All right, I'll make sure I put that in the links as well in the description. So, thank you both so much for joining me and talking about, wellness and the challenges and the hopes for the future. So, I really appreciate both of you and the work you do.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you for listening to the Wellness Law Podcast. You can find more wellness law resources by visiting the Center for Health and Wellness Law website at www.wellnesslaw.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media. Until the next episode, stay well, stay hopeful, and stay legal.